Basically, we're here discussing the legal aspects of HB 6423 and the ethical aspects of HB 6423. If you all want to offer some points on that now while we're just discussing, I think that would be good.
And if we are going to use recording, I'll start that now, just so, okay, so that would make sense to do that. Okay, so hold on.
Art, do you want to speak to the ethical aspects, and then we can ask Dory a little bit about some of the legal aspects?
Sure.
Why you think ethically this should be passed into law?
Well, I think many people who've been involved in these debates in different states have raised a couple of ethical concerns about eliminating religious exemptions. One is it respectful and tolerant of religious belief? The second issue is, shouldn't parents get to make choices about whether they do or don't want their kids to get vaccinated? And my very quick ethical responses are, certainly we want to respect religious belief. I have no issue about that. And it's a very fundamental ethical obligation to be tolerant. But religious beliefs can't harm the public health. And morally, you have a duty to protect the community. And you can't do things that imperil your kids' well-being. That we don't accept morally. You got to put the kids' health and best interests first. In this instance, too, there are no major religions, and I've surveyed them all, even Christian Science, which are opposed to vaccination. Christian Science makes the choice about vaccination and religion a conscience issue, and major churches like the Catholic Church are pro-vaccination. So when someone says they have a religious objection, it's dubious that they can invoke a religious authority to kind of back that up. I'm not saying you can never find one, but it's not a mainstream position of religions. The other issue, as I mentioned, and then I'll shut up, is, shouldn't parents make decisions? And the answer is yes. And we do try to let them look out for the best interests of their children. But having mandates to get vaccinated to go to school is something that we require because we know that we're protecting other children, and particularly vulnerable and sick children who, for health reasons, can't be vaccinated. So their interests have to come into the mix relative to what a parent can choose. And so you have situations where you vaccinate to protect your own kid, but you're vaccinating to protect other kids, both healthy and vulnerable. And that's a pretty powerful moral reason to, if you will, check parental decision-making so that you don't kill or harm other kids. We've seen that happen with different disease outbreaks over the years. We know that if you vaccinate, you're going to cut back on those outbreaks. So it's not a question of, it's not a hypothetical question. I'm going to say one last thing morally. This is a debate that is set up to have, and I think we will this year, next year, about COVID vaccination. And I find it really morally repugnant that you'd show up in public in numbers from out of state and try to convince Connecticut residents that religious exemptions ought to be permitted, knowing that we're in the middle of a plague. And so we've never been so clear about the vulnerability of the community. I think that shows a crass indifference to where the country's at relative to infectious disease. So I'll stop there.
And I have to apologize because I forgot to allow Mary to make the introductions. I'm trying to be sensitive to everybody's time. So Mary, please.
Oh, no, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure everybody knew each other. And if this is being taped and shown, which we plan to do, that people understand. So yeah, and don't want to take into time, but we have Dr. Arthur Kaplan here from New York University. He heads the biomedical ethics department there and founded it, I believe. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, founded it. And Dorit Rice, and the professor at Hastings Law School. And you've been working on this issue for a long time. Am I right? Yeah.
Yeah, you are.
quite a long time. So that's, I think, enough. And Selena and I both had a nonprofit that seeks to get out correct information and stop misinformation. So I think that was a great answer by Dr. Clatlin. So do we want to get into the legal stuff now? Is that?
I think
Unless someone wants to fire a question.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Christine Stewart.
Hey,
Can you just explain, just talk about the public health, I guess, in this and why it is so important to be vaccinated and you know, I guess why people just have a tendency to feel that it's not necessary to get vaccinated, and you know, the line that, you know, my unvaccinated kid isn't going to hurt any other unvaccinated person doesn't really fly.
yeah, good question. And that's an objection you hear. People will say, well, if your vaccines are so good, then what do you care what I do? But vaccines aren't perfect. Many of them have 5, 10, 15% of people who don't respond to them. And the way you have to accommodate that is to get more people vaccinated. Pretty simply, it gives whatever virus it is, COVID, mumps, measles, flu, less of an opportunity to jump around in a population. And we know the term for that is herd immunity. There are also going to be kids out there who can't vaccinate because they have immune diseases, they're getting treated for cancer. Their parents are desperate that if they go to school, that people be vaccinated to protect them. They have no protection other than what other kids are bringing to the classroom. So the idea that I don't have to vaccinate because you're all vaccinating, aside from being an obnoxious form of free riding, I'm not going to do it because you do it. It leaves too many other people vulnerable, even with vaccines. I mean, they're great, but they're not perfect.
Can I add one more category, which is baby siblings? Children in school may be fully vaccinated according to schedule, but they have baby siblings that are not. And when a mom comes to pick up a child from school with a baby, the last thing she wants is the baby to be exposed to a preventable disease in school.
This is true. Not to mention that the efficacy rate for mumps is only 85%, and we've seen a huge outbreak in colleges from of mumps all over the country, and that was before the pandemic. I'm just going to add that because that's a sensitive subject for me since I have college kids.
And we did have also, just piggybacking on their big meningitis B outbreak, we had to get vaccines approved very quickly. It was out of control very fast. That's not public school that way, but it's an example of how diseases spread very fast and can really, they don't necessarily just kill you. They can make you sterile. They can give you deafness. They can cause many other problems, which tend to get forgotten in all this. But you know, the real point is these days, right in front of our faces, is COVID vaccination. The more you do it, the more the disease moves away. And there are groups out there saying, I don't want to get a COVID vaccination, you do it. And as I said, that's what we call in ethics free riding. You're just not taking your duty, you're letting somebody else protect you without doing your share. That's bad community ethics.
So how do you counter the misinformation, and why are the pro-vaccine groups not up here at the Capitol today?
Do you want me to speak to that? the biggest
well, I mean, I'll take one sentence and then I'll let Selena say.
You take that, Art.
I mean, why I'm not there is because I think that the groups that are showing up in some numbers, we'll see what shows up, have been discredited in California, New York, Maine, in places where these fights have taken place. When we have vaccination for flu at NYU, some of these groups show up in the street. I've talked to them. They're not open to conversation. They are ready to just make this a political battle. That's why they walk around with Nazi paintings on the faces of posters of legislators who favor getting rid of the exemption. So I think the argument has to be one of facts and exchanging information in a reasonable forum. But I'm afraid the groups that are showing up now are not open to listening to that, and some of them threaten violence. So it's not necessarily a place where people feel safe. I mean, on the elimination of the exemption side.
Yeah, I don't think having two angry groups outside would make things better for deliberation. One of the reasons the anti-vaccine movement has been mobilizing nationally is that they haven't been able to make a convincing case on the merits. And they've openly said, we're coming to try and intimidate. We'll be loud, we'll try to scare. I don't think having a pro-vaccine presence would make that better. In fact, it might make it worse. If we want the legislators to actually deliberate on the merits and discuss the issues, we want less aggressive presence.
Can I also say something regarding that? I think that most people, the majority of residents in Connecticut do support this. That's what surveys from Vaccinate Your Family and so forth have shown, but they don't really feel compelled to mobilize because they aren't aware maybe of the specifics of the legislation or think that it's really as much of a problem as it appears that it could be. And I think that that's something to keep in mind, that it's something that we're trying to do, is to create awareness for what's happening and what the threats are. And so people understand that. I don't think that people are as tuned into this particular bill as many as you think.
And the bottom line, again, like I said, is when you rally during a pandemic, it really does undermine public health, especially when you're with a group of unvaccinated people. I mean, our mission statement says that we try to convince people to adhere to the scientific consensus. What does it say when we go out amongst people who are unmasked and rally? I think it definitely is it's a confusing statement if we do that. So I think right now what we're doing sends a better message. Wouldn't you say, Mary?
I think so. Yes, I agree with what you just said. Mm-hmm.
So do you want to speak to the legal aspects? Dory's written some, and both Art and Dory have written some good legal arguments about why HB 6423 can stand up in a court of law. I like some of the legal arguments that you've mentioned. Do you want to speak to that, Dory?
Sure. So the starting point for the legal discussion is that in over 100 years, no court in the United States, state and federal, up to and including the Supreme Court, has struck down a school immunization mandate on constitutional ground, and most of them have upheld it. Most of them, all of them that looked at this have upheld school mandates. Some of them have said you can't imply the religious exemption in some ways, but that's different. So why do courts so strongly support school mandates? The starting point is that they fit into our basic principles, and that's for many of the reasons that Art mentioned. School mandates protect children by increasing vaccine rates and preventing outbreaks, and protect the public health by preventing outbreaks that spill into the community. Basically, the courts say, even if you, the parent, have a right not to protect your child from disease, and even that right is not absolute, you don't have a right to impose the risk of disease on other families. And that's what school mandates prevent. Now, there's at least three questions you might ask. One is, what about the First Amendment? What about freedom of religion? There's two answers to that. The first is that right now, under our law, we don't have to get a religious exemption from a general law. You don't get a religious exemption if you have a religious opposition to paying your taxes. You don't get a religious exemption from bigamy laws if you have religious objections to them, unless the state wants to give you. And we know that there are people with religious.
Over there?
She froze.
Oh boy. Okay.
The other part of this is even no right is absolute, and religious freedom isn't absolute either. So when we're comparing religious freedom on one hand with children's health and the public health on the other, children's health generally wins. What about the right to education? Several schools in other states asked, do school mandates conflict with the right to education? And the answer was consistently no. Education needs safety. Outbreaks undermine education. You close a school in an outbreak. So school mandates that prevent outbreak help education. B, again, no right is absolute. Between children's right to access to education and children's health and life can trump. C, there are other children, as Art mentioned, the children that can't be vaccinated. And between the right to access to education of children who can't be safely vaccinated and children whose parents don't want to vaccinate, the children who can't have priority. And finally, as long as homeschool is a reasonable legal educational option, parents can choose if they're accepting the school rules or they're choosing to fill their child's right to education through homeschooling. If you're sending the child to the shared environment of school, you have to respect the school's rules. If you don't want to do that, you can homeschool. It's your right. It's a parent's choice. The last thing I'll mention is, what about parental rights? And here again, we're going back to the fact that A, parental rights are not absolute. We can limit them in the child's benefit. And B, the other children in school are not yours. You don't have parental rights in other people's children. So the legal framework has so far been very strong in support of school mandates. In recent years, when New York and California repealed the religious exemption, there were court challenges and they have consistently lost. I'm happy to answer questions. That's a good one.
Is there anybody behind the WSFB? I think, are they just taping? Maybe. I don't know. Right?
Any questions? Are there questions from the news WFSB?
I think Mike might just be taping it, or his affiliate.
Okay.
Sorry, I have a kid here.
All right. Okay. It's good to ask, answer the questions if they're there. All right. Is there another topic either of you would want to
share, Art? Do you think we covered everything, Art, or?
Yeah, almost. I was just going to say, the part of the issue is, what are these out-of-state people doing here? They don't have a stake in the answer to this question. They are not somebody that the legislature said, come on, we want to have you stand outside and demonstrate. This is an organized know-nothing movement. It's been debunked. The claims that they make don't stand up by any scientific or medical standard. They have lost their efforts to bully legislatures in a couple of other states on the exact same issue. But again, I find it odd, not so much that people would show up, but that nobody from Connecticut is in their group, or very few. I don't care to count how many people are there. I care to count how many people are there from Connecticut. And I don't think there's going to be a lot.
Well, there are anti-vaxxers from Connecticut, and in New Jersey they.
Right, but I mean, there might be what of the group that shows up, 5%.
Yeah, well, you're right. They're coming over from different states, and they're trying.
Yeah.
What they're trying to do is they're using intimidation to intimidate the senators, to vote no on a very important bill because they.
And again, I think. Part of the reason is to point out the small percentage of Connecticut. What's the intimidation? They don't have the votes. The polls show that people want this done.
Exactly.
Very few anti-vaxxers in the demonstration. So unless you're going to threaten violence against the legislators, I hope they follow what the political will is on this issue.
Well, the political will of the people is to vote yes.
Exactly.
We're the silent majority because
exactly.
That's. The people want the bill to pass. Unfortunately, sometimes the loud minority gets more press, unfortunately.
Right, and I'm all for the loud minority, but I wish some of them were from the state.
For sure.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Well, do you have anything to add, Mary?
No, I think it's interesting, and it will be interesting to see how many show up today. Many of them got to testify in place of Connecticut residents. Many Connecticut residents didn't get to testify. We know some of them, and many of them did. So, you know, they've had their say, and that's good in a democracy, even if they're not from the state. So now it's time to vote, and hopefully they will get to that soon, hopefully within the next 24 hours, because we should get this through. And we hope
Do we know, this is just for Dorit and I, when the vote might happen?
Well, interestingly enough, the Senate is on the calendar for today and tomorrow.
Yeah, so it could be tomorrow.
They start at 12, but they usually don't start on time. So, you know, hopefully they do it sooner than later. I think, again, the anti-vax crowd would like to delay the vote through intimidation. They have screens all over, you know, bands are giving free pizza out to the kids. But again, hopefully sooner than later. Are you going to be around, Art, if anybody wants to interview you about the vote later?
Yeah, I'm here all day, and I actually have an NPR interview scheduled for 3:45 today, national. And I'd like to comment on what's going on, so I'm hoping somebody can tell me what's going on.
Okay, I will.
I'm just sitting in Ridgefield and I don't know what's going on.
Okay, well, Art, I'm going to be watching it all day.
Okay.
So I'll email you my phone.
Yeah, check in with me,
Okay.
shoot me an email. Good.
WSFB, one of the guys asked me about, you know, who might be around in case they wanted to talk to somebody.
I'll be around.
Okay, I'll let them know that.
I'm sorry, I need to go take care of kids now.
No
Okay,
problem.
All right. Thank you so much, Dory. We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you for coming on, and well, thank you, everybody. We'll be in touch, and we appreciate everyone's time because this is a busy
Thank
day.
you.